Hey listeners, this is Tessa Dare. Just wanted to pop in to issue a quick content warning. During this episode, we touch on the film 9.5 Weeks and end up briefly discussing sexual assault as it pertains to the film. We don't go into much detail, but I thought it would be a good idea to mention it up top so you can decide for yourself if you want to listen today. That's all. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to Where You Lead, a podcast where we, a real-life mother and daughter duo, rewatch Gilmore Girls and discuss the misadventures of fictional mother and daughter duo Lorelai and Rory Gilmore. I am Tessa Dare, a writer and the author of the paranormal mystery series The Carons and Chronicles, and Beth's daughter.
And I'm Beth, Tessa's mom. I'm also a writer. We used to watch the Gilmore Girls together religiously, pretty much, when Tess was Rory's age and I was a little bit older than Lorelai is in the TV show. Tessa's friends used to compare us to the Gilmore Girls because I was a single mom. Tess went to a private prep school that we could not afford. We've always had long analytical conversations about movies and TV, music, politics. When Tess moved to Seattle, we continued these talks over the phone, and sometimes they went pretty long. One day it occurred to us that we should move these discussions over to the digital world, maybe even into a podcast. And the Gilmore Girls felt like a good place to start, so here we are.
Yes, and each week we're loosely trying to remember to mention how much coffee we're drinking, because coffee is a big thing on the Gilmore Girls. We're both pretty big coffee addicts, and so figured might as well start this off with what we're drinking in terms of coffee. I have already had a can of a double latte, like an iced double latte in a can, and I am now drinking from the same brand, a vanilla draft latte. Second coffee can of the day. It's a coffee can.
I was going to say, that's a lot of coffee. That looks like 12 ounces.
And is it 12? It's 9. It's 9 ounces.
9. Well, so you're on your second half of 18.
Yes.
That's pretty wild. I've actually only had one large cup of coffee from St. Louis Bread Company, and that's been an hour. I'm trying to stick to water now because it's getting, in St. Louis, it's getting late for the day. So we're recording this, we should also mention, from two different cities.
Yes.
Tess is in Seattle, I'm in St. Louis. We're in different time zones, so it's a little late for me to be drinking coffee. Mm-hmm. But I did just finish mine about an hour ago. So
also, I don't keep normal human hours, so I don't start drinking coffee until like 11 a.m. So not that late for me. All right, so this is episode 7. It's called Kiss and Tell.
It was originally aired November 16th, 2000.
And just a brief overview of the episode is that this is the episode where, as the title implies, Rory experiences her first kiss, but she does not tell Lorelai about it.
For weird reasons, too. It's not...
Yeah, for pretty
the whole thing, reasons. There's a jumble of reasons, actually, that we'll get to, but yeah.
I would also say, and this brings us to the second scene, so we'll get there in a second, but the other reason this is a big episode is we finally have Taylor Doose.
Who?
Taylor, the guy who owns the grocery store.
The grocery store. Yeah, he's kind of annoying. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a long-running character, and it has just struck me as very odd that we've gone 6 whole episodes without him, because I just remember him being such a constant on the show, and turns out he doesn't show up until episode 7. So we'll get to his entrance in a second.
It's funny that you remembered him and his name and everything, and you've mentioned him in a couple times in previous episodes, but I didn't remember him at all, and I think it's because I have not really rewatched this series since it was originally aired 22 years ago. You've seen it a couple times since then. So plus, you just have a much better memory than I have. So
I've seen the first season again since then, but I've never actually seen the show in its entirety. There's whole chunks of the show that I don't remember. But yes, I do remember Taylor, because as this episode sets up, he and Luke have kind of a long-running, not exactly feud, just I guess a long-running clash of personalities.
Contentiousness.
Yes.
They're a little contentious with each other. But Taylor does reveal something in this episode about Luke, actually pretty early on, that answers a question for us that we have actually brought up several times so far. But go ahead and set the scene.
Okay, so there's one scene before this, and so we'll just go over that one pretty quickly. As basically we start with an explosion all over the town of autumn decor.
Oh my God.
I mean, it's, I think this really speaks to the strange way this show treats time, because it's like they really want you to know that it's fall, but I feel like the decor is sort of a deliberate mishmash of Halloween and Thanksgiving.
Yes. My first note was that, it's Halloween. They're running through a pumpkin patch.
Right?
But then no, because then we see the dancers who are dressed up as pilgrims.
Yeah. And some of them quite inappropriately as Native Americans, something that I don't think would have been done on television today, but was still considered okay at that time. I think they are also referred to as Indians, and to be honest, I am not the expert on what you should call anyone, but generally you should try to find out what tribe you are actually referring to, because Indians are not a single people.
Use the term indigenous. Or native, but we've certainly come a long way in 22 years, and that's been a good thing.
So Lorelai and Rory are walking through the town, having a conversation about laundry.
About underwear specifically.
Yes, underwear specifically. Lorelai reveals she is not wearing any because she has run out, which, maybe this is one of the times that proves that I'm actually much more similar to Lorelai than to Rory. I don't do this as much anymore, but I definitely for a pretty long time would do exactly what Lorelai is doing. Run out of underwear and then just don't wear any for the day and hope that nobody notices.
But I love that Rory admits that she did a load of laundry for herself. We should point out once again that Rory and Lorelai have distinctly different personalities and approaches to life, and that plays out in this episode perfectly. But it starts with this scene where we realize that Rory is the adult in this relationship.
Yep.
She's done her laundry, and she didn't tell her mom because it was a full load, and she probably felt, but did not say, Mom, you're an adult. You can do your own frickin' laundry, and including your underwear. Why should I worry about you? You're the mother. I'm the daughter. I did my laundry. Why don't you do yours? So anyway, there's none of that is said, but it's just that I was laughing thinking about this as it was happening, because it's definitely a reversal of traditional roles.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, although I will say I had a question, which I don't know. I guess it makes a certain amount of sense because Rory and Lorelai have different schedules, but I'm just like, how does someone do a load of laundry in your house and you don't notice?
Like, you don't. Well, I have an answer for that. She probably did it. Well, she probably sneaked around and did it because she didn't want Lorelai to know. But she probably did it after school. I assume she gets home from school before Lorelai gets home from work. I don't know. But she rides a bus though.
You'd need at least 2 hours.
Yeah, I don't know how she did it. They don't. The time thing doesn't happen right in this show. But she did it very successfully.
Yes, she did. And then
I just love it.
At the end of their conversation, they walk past Miss Patty, who is choreographing this dance.
Flutter is what she's saying. Yeah.
And she says, "Where are my leaves? I got pumpkins, I got pilgrims, I got no leaves."
And she says all of this with a cigarette in her hand.
Yes.
Because this is still 2000, and we still have really not got to the point where we don't have those kinds of things in scenes with children, which is what's going on here.
Yeah. I think Miss Patty is also kind of an intentional throwback, because it's usually like a cigarette and a cigarette holder, right?
And a holder, she's definitely throwback is a great way to describe it. She's a trope almost. I mean, she's just but as with everybody in this show who's kind of a stereotype, they all kind of have stereotypical components to their characters, but they all transcend those. And she certainly does. She's much more than the stereotype would say about her.
All right, so then Lorelai and Rory go to Luke's diner, and this is where we finally meet Taylor. So we can continue our Taylor discussion. Because, so they enter the diner, and Luke is basically being harassed and followed around by Taylor, who is trying to get him to put fall decor up in the diner. And Luke is not into it. Luke does not like orange, nor does he like having this conversation every year, which is when we get Taylor saying that Luke has lived here for years.
You have lived in Stars Hollow for a long time now, and it's time you became one of us. That's our first, I don't know, the first time anybody's mentioned how long. Up until now, Luke has seemed like a newcomer.
A little bit,
and maybe
yeah.
he still is. Maybe he is a newcomer compared to anybody else.
I think at this point, this is where we get it a little bit more confirmed for us that it's just his personality is the personality of an outsider.
Yes, but he's also a curmudgeon.
Oh yeah.
So and every town needs a curmudgeon.
Mm-hmm.
So and that's definitely Luke. Yeah. Well, Luke and Miss Kim share that. They are both curmudgeons.
But yeah, so Lorelai and Rory kind of spend some time trying to get Luke's attention enough to give them coffee, but they fail at that. So Lorelai ends up going behind the diner counter and serving them, and supposedly getting Rory a blueberry muffin. But I don't think you ever actually see Rory even holding the muffin. I think when they walk out, they just have the coffee. So,
but here's the thing about that particular part of this scene is that I get the impression that Lorelai is the only person he ever allows to walk behind the counter, because he does not yell at her, and in fact all he does when she's getting the muffins is say, don't forget to use the tweezers, the tongs, the tongs, the tweezers.
It's definitely like we are not that far off from when Suki did this, from when Suki walked behind the counter and he kind of flipped out the second he saw her, even before he saw all the things she was doing, and he's right there when Lorelai walks behind the counter and he doesn't say anything. So yeah, it's definitely a marked difference.
There are couple of scenes, I should say, in this episode with the two of them where their relationship seems to be settling into a softer place.
Oh yeah.
And that happens later on too. Not yet quite sweet, but certainly softer.
There were definitely a couple of times during this episode where I felt like he was almost the default second parent to Rory.
That's what I was thinking too. In fact, I have it in my notes. It definitely seems like it's mom and dad in one scene. We're getting ahead of ourselves, but it's definitely.
Are a bit. So yeah, Lorelai served herself, and then on their way out, Luke calls after her, "What about the tip?" And she responds, "Oh yeah, here's a tip. Serve your customers." And he responds, "Here's another. Don't sit on any cold benches." Because
that was great, and kind of what's the word I want? It gives
suggestive?
you a visual. It's what?
A suggestive?
It gives you a real visual image. It's like, how did they get that past the censors? Honestly, I mean,
Yeah. My first thought was, that sounds to me like Luke has gone without underwear before.
But not wearing a skirt.
True.
So she's wearing a skirt with no panties, and it's very suggestive and visual. I mean, it gives you a visual right away, and it's like, oh my god, how did this get past the censors? But anyway, onwards.
And he knows that because I sort of jumped past this, but in their attempts to get his attention, Rory said that her mom wasn't wearing any underwear, so that's how he knows that that's happening. And all of that is before the credits, and then right after that, we get Rory getting off the bus after school. This is pretty much a pure town episode, so we don't get any actual time at Chilton this episode. And
no time with grandparents. And when she gets off the bus, she looks grumpy. I mean, she doesn't look like she's in a good mood. When I was looking at it, what's going on with her? What is this look on her face that she looks, there's something wrong. But it turns out she's just a little nervous.
Yeah.
Because she's getting ready to walk into the store.
Yeah, she's going over to see Dean at the market. And this is where we get another Taylor episode, which I kind of love this. We haven't seen Taylor this whole time. I almost wonder if Taylor was secretly on vacation or something. And then all of a sudden he's in like every single scene this episode.
I was kind of thinking that maybe they realized as they moved along with the Dean storyline that they're going to have to show him in the store more often, so they need to have somebody else, another character who's associated with the store, to kind of give it a grounding.
Maybe they were waiting to pull out a character like this for maybe they were waiting for some kind of seasonal thing. The idea that the whole town goes all out for generic fall, not really Halloween, not really Thanksgiving, but goes all out for I guess they do, they call it like the autumn festival.
Yeah, and they have a lot of festivals. They have a lot of celebrations, themed celebrations throughout the show, and that's a constant throughout the series. This is the first one, though,
right? The first one.
It's the first one, I think. Yeah, because we've been dealing with the beginning of school up until now. There really hasn't been there have been birthday parties, and funerals.
But that makes it the perfect episode to introduce someone like Taylor, who is just like very obsessed with sort of town cohesion and everything looking a certain way. Actually, I do sort of, I have no real hard evidence for this one way or the other, but I have always felt that Taylor is kind of coded gay. What do you feel?
I don't think I know enough yet. I'd have
Yeah.
to see him in a few more scenes. He's kind of like a male Miss Patty, though.
Yeah.
So maybe so. They're both kind of over the top characters.
Maybe it's more just that this is a different, and I guess it's also that he's always put in contrast with Luke, who is a very stereotypically masculine character. Like
Yes.
you said, the curmudgeon. I actually kind of feel like Luke and Taylor are both curmudgeons in different ways.
Different ways, yeah.
Luke is a curmudgeon in this very traditional, masculine, owner of the diner, doesn't want to talk to anybody kind of way. And
always has a flannel shirt on.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Taylor is a curmudgeon in a, like, everything has to be his way kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has to go the way that he wants it to go. So, I don't know. I definitely think that he could be interpreted multiple different ways, and, you know, gay and straight are not the only sexualities that exist. Maybe he's a representation of someone who's asexual, you know, someone who's an older person who appears to have never married, you know, maybe... Or
and
maybe
the town. He has married the town.
He's married the town.
He's parenting the town. He's responsible for...
Yeah. And maybe it's just that, like, these are two different ideas of masculinity, where Luke's is, like, the stepping back kind of masculinity, and Taylor is much more like a controlling patriarch of the town.
Yeah, that's another way to look at it.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't know why I have so much to say about Taylor specifically.
And you've been waiting, too, because you've brought him up a couple times. You were waiting to get to Taylor.
I mean, I think I just love the back and forth between Taylor and Luke, because they're both kind of always a little bit wrong, and it's sort of funny to see them fight each other.
Yeah, they are both almost always wrong.
Yeah.
But let's get to the next scene, because this is the scene that's the MacGuffin of everything in this episode, and we have to spell it out.
So yeah, Rory enters the store. She picks up a thing of cornstarch, which... Was she also looking at cornstarch the last time she came in here?
I don't know, but she doesn't actually pick it up at first. She's just kind of standing there looking at it, touching it. Mm-hmm. And every time he looks over at her, you know, she looks down and she sees, we should say that she sees Dean. He's around the corner talking to a customer. And she's just kind of playing with this cornstarch, and she picks it up when he walks over and starts talking to her. And, you know, they have a conversation about her imaginarily needing this cornstarch, which has happened before. This is not the first time. They've talked about things that she really doesn't need, but that she's picked up to distract her, you know, make him think she was there for another reason.
Yeah, and so he comes over and offers her a free pop, and she immediately laughs at him because pop is not called pop in Connecticut. It's called soda.
It's called soda here, too.
It's called soda here, yeah.
Yeah, I had family from Michigan, and they called it pop. And so I'm thinking, like, certain northern states, it's called pop. I could be wrong about this, and maybe our listeners will make comments on this episode and say, no, I live in Texas and I call it pop. But I don't think so. I think in Texas they call it Dr. Pepper. But, you know, some places they call it Coke. Yeah. New Jersey, they call it Coke. Yes, literally call it Coke. And I don't know. This is a fascinating, for me, Americana kind of question. What do you call soda in your neck of the woods? But anyway.
And I feel like I've looked at those, like, maps that tell you where it's called different things, but I feel like I've looked at a couple and they all kind of contradicted each other. So I feel like I don't really know which different places call it different things. I've always called it soda.
St. Louis, we call it soda. Now, I don't know about the rest of Seattle. That's northern, but it's not Midwestern northern, so I don't know.
I think most of my friends up here call it soda, but
because a lot of you are transplants too. A lot of your friends are transplants.
Well, I'm thinking specifically of my friends who did grow up here, and I'm pretty sure they call it soda, although the main one that I can think of exclusively drinks Diet Coke. So
it's Coke.
So he does call it Coke, but that's because he's literally drinking Coke. So I don't know. But so he offers her a free pop, and she comes over to the little soda fridge, and he puts 2 sodas behind his back and tells her to guess, and she leans over to say her guess, and then he swoops in and sneaks a kiss, and she says thank you, and then runs away again.
Runs away with the cornstarch in her hand. She never pays for it. She runs out of the store. And there are a couple things happening in this scene that I find fascinating. Well, we find out later on he's had a girlfriend before. Yes. So he knows how the flirtatious dance works. Mm-hmm. She does not. This is her first attempt. She had no idea when she leaned in that he was going to kiss her. Yeah. I don't think we did either. I mean, it did come as a surprise until it happened. Then it was like, well, of course that's what he was doing. He's been flirting with her this whole scene. And she's been receiving that flirtatiousness kind of with an astonished approach. She's astonished that he would be interested in her because she is tall and gorgeous and charismatic and flirtatious and smart. He knows all the stuff she knows. When they talk about music and movies, he knows all the references. And he's seen a lot of the same movies she's seen. So he's perfect for her in almost every way. She can't believe that, first of all. She's never had a boyfriend. She's never been kissed. This is her first kiss. Yeah. And in fact, it happens in aisle 3, and as per our usual, I would rename this episode In Aisle 3.
Maybe I would rename it Kissed by the Lord.
Yeah, that's good too. Oh, and that is going to be an interesting thing to discuss too. But anyway.
So yeah, we can talk about it pretty much now. Go ahead.
Well, pretty much the rest of the episode is her trying to figure out how to tell her mom about this. Yeah. So that's why the kiss is the MacGuffin. And it's a shame because she's so focused on trying to figure out how to tell her mom that she doesn't really get to enjoy what happened or understand or think about it, until later on. But anyway.
But she does a little bit, because she runs away to tell Lane. She basically makes a beeline straight to Kim's Antiques and runs in and immediately tells Lane. And unfortunately, furthering the plot of this episode, Mrs. Kim overhears them. So Rory goes, oh my God, he kissed me. And Mrs. Kim pops up behind her and says, who kissed you? And Lane immediately says, the Lord, Mama.
The kiss of the Lord. And it's funny because we don't know it yet, but Miss Kim knows better. She doesn't believe her. Yeah. So she's not as stupid as her daughter seems to think she is. Yeah. And we'll get to that in a minute, but she accepts it. She accepts what Lane tells her. And then they have this great, and I want to backtrack just a little bit here too and say that first kiss, aside from everything that happens, is so sweet. Yeah. And it's very sweet that he does it. The look on her face is sweet. When she says thank you, it's sweet, even though she feels that it's a nerdy thing to do. Later on, she mentions that. But I just want to put that out there that it was a very, very sweet scene. And it's kind of sets you up for some of the difficult stuff that's coming up. So, yeah. But anyway, she stands there and tells Lane all the details, tells her from beginning to end exactly what happens, and then later on, of course, keeps telling her the same story over and over because Lane can't get it enough. Yeah. But she doesn't tell Lorelai.
Yeah, and so in this scene, she tells Lane everything, and then she initially turns around to go tell her mom, but then she pauses and says, the last time the subject of boys came up, it got very ugly. Lane rightly points out that was different, because then she was thinking about giving up on Chilton over a guy, but then Roy's like, right, but it was over this guy. It's the same guy.
Same guy, yeah. And she also, it's just hard. She's always shared everything with her mom. Yeah. She wants to share her first kiss with her mom, but she hasn't told her about Dean. She's so which do I do first?
Yeah. It also, it's a little bit of like a comedy of timing errors issue, because she does decide that she's gonna tell her mom, and she comes home ready to tell her, but then Lorelai is just having a really bad day. She's trying to get the people to come and fix the fridge, and despite having been on the phone with them for a really long time and argued her case with multiple different people on the other side, she does not succeed in the conversation. She tries to pressure them into coming the next day before she has to leave for work. They refuse. They're going to come Monday, however much later that is, between 3 and 8. Yeah. Which is a bummer. And then she's really pissed. And then Rory, you can kind of see on Rory's face that she realizes that this is not an optimum time to share her happy news. So she just kind of totally retreats into her shell. Unfortunately, the very next scene is the scene of Lorelai finding out from someone else.
That you wouldn't expect.
Yeah. Oh, I did also want to say Lorelai is wearing like a crocheted bandana on her head.
Yeah.
Which I loved. And also, those were so popular at that time. Everyone had a little bandana. They were like made specifically to be worn as headbands. Little headband bandanas.
Oh, I do not remember this at all.
Yeah, I don't remember that many of them being crocheted, which I like Lorelai's a lot better than a lot of the ones that existed at the time. But I think I had one. It was like a little triangle of fabric with like a little band sewn to one end of it that you could very easily tie as a headband. They were very big at that time.
Okay. Now I'm going to have to rewatch the episode until I get to that scene so I can see what
just look at her little headband. Yeah. But yeah, so the very next scene is Lorelai goes to Mrs. Kim's Antiques to pick up a rocker that she bought 6 weeks before.
Oh, and by the way, did you see what color the rocker was? It's a dark teal.
Okay,
It's a beautiful color. And the way she's dressed in this scene, since we're talking about clothes, she looks very drab to me. So I think there's a reversal of roles here. She's usually the one that knows what's going on, that is hip to what's going on with the girls. Lane confides in her things she would never tell her own mother. So Lorelai is usually the mother who knows everything, which, by the way, I would say she and I had in common, because when I had several mothers, when you were Rory's age, we would be talking and they would say, "How do you know these things?" And I'd say, "Well, Tess tells me." And they would say that their daughters didn't tell them anything. And they were never in the know. Sometimes they would come to me and say, "Do you know what's going on with XYZ?" So that's another thing that Lorelai and I have in common. But in this scene, it's just the opposite. She is not in the know. Mrs. Kim is in the know.
Yeah, for once, Mrs. Kim knows something that Lorelai doesn't. And it's a very personal something, and Lorelai is totally thrown by not knowing it.
And I think the drab clothes are supposed to show that she's on the, in the power scale. She's out of balance. Yeah, her scale is down. That's one thing that's happening here. And Mrs. Kim it's a little odd for her, I think, that Lorelai doesn't know this. So I don't know if she knows that Lorelai usually knows everything that's going on with Lane, and if she's astounded by this reversal of roles here. There are several reversal of roles in this episode. So, but Mrs. Kim, we realize, is not as dumb as she is. Well, I shouldn't say dumb. That's not the right expression. She picks up and understands a lot more than the story runners, the writers have revealed to us.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know, I can't remember exactly if this continues this way or if this is a one-off, but one-off, you get that out. But up until now, she has never been the one in the know. And I think that's been deliberate. So I don't know if this is portends for the future, but she is not as unaware as people think she is. Well, obviously, she's a successful businesswoman. Yeah. She's got a very successful antique shop. So she's not dumb, not by any means. She probably hears a lot more going on in her shop than she lets on.
I mean, I think it's more naive, that people think she's naive because she's so Christian and like wants Lane to be so sheltered. I think it's easy to think that she then, doesn't get these things.
But don't you wonder, when Lane said that to her, it was kissed by the Lord, Mom.
Yeah.
And she knew what she had heard, and she knew it was a boy who kissed her. So what does she think about Lane in that moment, talking to her like that? That's what I'm kind of fascinated by in this episode. One of the things.
Yeah. I'm not sure why Lane thought she would be able to get away with that, but maybe she just hoped. Maybe Lane is just in a place where she automatically lies so much to her mom that she just couldn't not lie, even though there was almost no way she was going to get away with that lie.
But why did she start that to begin with? Why does she assume that her mother doesn't understand or doesn't know what's going on in the world? Because I think she does.
Yeah. So Lorelai ends up leaving the antique store without getting the chair still.
Of course. We knew that. We could see that coming.
The next scene is Rory and Lane again, dressed as pilgrims, sitting at one of the tables for the festival, apparently collecting donations, but really talking about the kiss again. Lane is asking her to tell her the story one more time, and Rory responds, "I've been telling you this story for an hour. It doesn't get dirty."
And then they go on, and apparently Lane has been doing some research on
Dean.
and
On
Dean.
Dean as a
And the listeners, just so you know, my daughter actually texted me earlier in the week and said, "Be careful about this week's episode of Gilmore Girls, Mom,
Yeah.
because
That's not how I put it.
Rory doesn't like the name Beth."
Yeah, I think I just said, FYI, Rory shits on your name in this episode or something.
Yeah, and there's a Beth, and I said to her, "That's okay, I'm used to it." Karen is the new Beth. I mean,
Yeah.
Beth used to be kind of a name for people who were a little, dumb. So that doesn't surprise me that they named her Beth and gave Rory such a bad reaction to it. But then they're talking about Todd, who is the person who gave her all this information, and I wrote in my notes, Todd is not much better.
No, Todd is also a terrible name, and I feel like
It's a
Todd
terrible
is
name.
often the name of a character who sucks. I mean, yeah, I think maybe Beth just became considered to be like an old-fashioned name, because if I think of the most famous, I don't know, if I try to think of like a famous Beth, the first thing that comes to mind is the character from Little Women, which is like at this point pretty old, so maybe that just became associated with older stuff and therefore became considered like an old-fashioned name. Although I definitely still, like, there are still young people who are named Beth. It's not that old-fashioned.
Yeah, and some women who are named Mary Beth go by Beth.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of there are quite a few nicknames for Elizabeth. There's Liz, there's Betsy, which is an odd one, but it is, there's Eliza, there's Liza. So there's a lot of different nicknames for Elizabeth. I don't know why my mother picked Beth. I've always hated it. So I get what she's saying in this scene.
So Rory asks Lane why she's so interested in the kiss when Lane herself recently got kissed, and Lane explains that her kiss was on the forehead by, quote, a theology major in a members-only jacket who truly believes that rock music leads to hard drugs. Which, that sounds terrible. And then she explains, or she tells Rory about Dean's music taste. She lists that he likes Nick Drake, Liz Phair, and the Sugar Plastic.
I've not heard of any of those bands.
The only one of these that I'd heard of was Liz Phair.
Yeah, I have heard of her, yeah.
But I did do a bit of research. So Liz Phair I knew about beforehand. The story of Liz Phair is that she was a pretty popular, like, indie music person. And then after having, I think, at least one, maybe two albums that had, like, a decent amount of popularity for someone who was, like, indie and, like, started off without a major record label, they were pretty popular. And then she, like, got signed to a major record label or something and ended up putting out this big pop hit, and a lot of her fans thought that she had sold out. But that is why I've heard of her. Because that album did super well. So out of these three, I think Liz Phair is probably today the most well-known. And the other two, so I looked up Nick Drake. Sounds like a very sad story about him. He died pretty young and actually mostly became popular after his death. I won't get too into it in case stories like this are triggering for people, but yeah, he was a musician. He did put out 2 albums, and actually later on in the episode, Rory and Dean are discussing one of his albums, the Pink Moon one. There's a reference. But yeah, apparently much of his popularity occurred after his death. He sort of grew kind of a cult status after his death. And the Sugar Plastic is an alternative band from LA. I did listen to a little bit of both Nick Drake and the Sugar Plastic. They both kind of sounded like 60s acoustic guitar hippie music. Neither of them were actually from the 60s. I think they were both from, like, actually I don't remember. Let me pull up Nick Drake so I can get his timing right. But I know the Sugar Plastic was like late 80s, but it just sounded like a real throwback kind of sound. Okay, so Nick Drake was 70s.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was his first name Mitch or Nick?
Nick, N-I-C-K. But yeah, so these are all three of these. So I'm pretty sure
English.
So I'm pretty sure this episode would have aired before Liz Phair's super big hit. So all 3 of these are indie music tastes, which I do like, and I feel like the show is maybe trying to bring to light some music that is not as well known. But I will also say that it is a little bit unrealistic that almost every single character we meet is in love with some insanely obscure band that you've never heard of. Like, everyone in this universe
And then everybody else gets the reference.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other thing, too, is like, I'm sorry, I know a lot about movies and music and culture, and I don't get half the references in here. So they're very obscure. I've never heard of Nick Drake. Died in 1974.
Yeah. I feel like for Lane it makes sense because it is literally like her number one personality trait is that she's obsessed with like finding new obscure music. And I think even for Rory it makes sense because Lane is her best friend, so it makes sense that she would have like heard about, you know, some of these things from Lane. But I do feel like Dean, it does not make as much sense.
How does he know everything?
Yeah. How does he know these three at the time very obscure acts?
It's a good question, because do we ever learn anything about his family background? Do we ever meet his parents? No, I don't think so.
I don't know if we ever meet his parents. I do think we at some point meet his sister. I think only one, and he does in this episode say that he has sisters plural. I'm not sure if that remains true later on in the show. I think he ultimately, I don't know, I don't remember that well, but I do remember that at some point we meet one of his sisters at least. But yeah, then during this conversation, Lane mentions that he has an ex named Beth, and Rory says that she hates the name Beth. So yeah, then the next scene after that is back at Luke's diner where Miss Patty is eating with a friend and is not very subtly trying to help pressure Luke into putting up fall decorations. Taylor has officially recruited other members of the town to try to pressure Luke into putting some, I guess specifically he wants him to put up turkeys. Which,
poor Luke.
Yeah, like it is one of those things where I feel like Luke is totally in the right. It's his diner. He should not have to put up decor if he doesn't want to. On the other hand, pumpkins are great. Pumpkins are great decor. I feel like if you just put in a couple pumpkins, that would be fine.
He could totally put some pumpkins in the window. They wouldn't kill anybody, you know?
But whatever, it is his diner. This is actually kind of part of the same scene, because basically Lorelai is sitting in the diner and hard staring at Lane and Rory through the window, just like watching them with this look of, Luke calls it concern. It looks like more than concern. It's like devastation. She almost looks like Rory broke up with her or something.
Yeah,
like, she looks distraught and kind of obsessed.
Yeah, and we have to remember too that she's been having a bad week, so it's exaggerated in her mind. But yeah, she does look at this, but at the same time, it's like I'm seeing this scene and thinking, you had a good woman. You have a very close relationship with your daughter. That is not a given. You know, a lot of mothers and daughters don't get along because it was just the two of you for so long with, of course, the town that is their surrogate family. You tell each other everything. But she's growing up and she has friends. She's going to have a boyfriend. She's got a school that's in another town. She has extended her universe and her parameters beyond your world. So that's what's going on here. And it's not the first time we've seen it. It's been happening gradually. It's going to keep happening until the day she walks out the door and goes to college. And even after that. So this is a metaphor of what all parents go through. You know, that they have to see their children not as their children, but as people with their own personalities, their own lives, their own futures, and they gotta let them go. It's just the way it is.
But yeah, so Luke tries to get her to talk about whatever is making her upset, but she gets him to back off by claiming that she might at any moment start telling him to put up streamers and join in on everyone's pressuring. And then Rory comes in.
He walks away.
Yeah, and he's like, okay, fine, I'm leaving. And then Rory shows up to drink some of Lorelai's coffee and then leave. Lorelai thought they were getting lunch, but it turns out Rory and Lane are understaffed at the table, and Lorelai at this point knows about the kiss and basically tries to get Rory to talk about it. Like she's trying to set Rory up to mention it, but it goes completely over Rory's head, and
she's in a hurry. She's going to give her mom a little bit of time and then get back to it. And by the way, is this Saturday or Sunday? I thought it was Saturday, but then the evening activities happen, and they have to get ready for school and work the next day. So this is Sunday.
So it must be Sunday, yeah. Yep.
Days are not a thing that they actually experience in Stars Hollow.
So Rory ends up bouncing and going back to Lane, Luke and Lorelai have another quick exchange where he passes her and says, "Not gonna say you look concerned," and she responds with, "Not gonna talk about how good you'd look dressed like one of the guys from The Crucible." And then the next scene is Lorelai kind of doing what Rory has been doing this whole time and going to spy on Dean in the market.
Yeah.
Except Lorelai gets caught by Luke. And this is where we
and
kind
this
of
is
get...
the mom and dad scene. Yeah.
This is the mom
and dad scene. A little bit of foreshadowing.
Scene. Yeah, he catches her, asks her what she's doing, and she finally admits that Rory got kissed, and quote-unquote, that guy did it, pointing at Dean. And then she says, "Look at him. Look how smug he is." And Luke responds, "He's bagging groceries. It's hard to be smug bagging groceries."
Yeah, the whole scene is just, we see a completely different side of Luke here. He gives her great advice.
Yeah.
And, he's telling her, what you and I have just been saying, you got to let her grow up. This is what's going to happen. Boys are going to be a part of her life. He looks like a decent guy. He's got a job. And she says something like, "Okay, Mr. Reality, break into somebody else's house." Because he's giving her reality. He's telling her this is reality. This is the way it is. But the way they have positioned them, the way the director has positioned the two of them in this scene and throughout the scene in the store, they are at each other's shoulders the whole time, like their mom and dad looking over at this potential future son-in-law. That's what this scene looked like to me. This is definitely mom and dad.
Yeah, I feel like there was also a fair amount of like physicality between the two of them.
Very, very physical. Yeah. Very close.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a small store. This is another thing. This store is incredibly small. I mean, before Trader Joe's expanded their aisles because they got so popular, it was that kind of small. It's even smaller than that. It's like a 7-Eleven kind of thing. Or a Quick Trip.
It kind of reminds me of the grocery store that was on campus when I was in college.
Yes. Yeah. That one. Yes. Yeah. It's that small.
But yeah. So and one of the things that she says when they're talking about it, when she's calmed down a little bit, she says that he looks like Christopher. And Luke basically responds that that's not that surprising because Lorelai and Rory are so similar that it follows that they would maybe have similar taste in men.
But she misinterprets it first. What does she think he's saying?
I don't know.
Yeah, she thinks he's saying something about, it's a slap in the face to her, whatever she thinks he's saying, and I can't remember what it was now. But then he says, no, I mean, it's because, that she would like somebody that looks like her father, I think, or something. I don't know. But no, that's what he's saying. No, that's not what I mean.
Yeah, it's just, he just means that they have similar taste in men. But ultimately, she comes down on the fact, the thing that she really can't get over is that Rory didn't tell her. Like, yes, she is freaked out that Rory is, experimenting with guys in general, but the real issue is that Rory didn't tell her, and Lorelai didn't get to have the moment that Lane got to have of the confiding and the girlfriend talk. But as they are walking and Luke is giving her advice, at a certain point she kind of surpasses him, accepts everything that he's saying, and realizes that she just needs to go and talk to Rory about it.
Yeah.
And so
she grows up.
Yeah. She does, and basically waits for Rory to come home, then just pops up and says, "So, kissed any good boys lately?" Oh yeah, and then she, so we've got another reference here. She says something like, "Did you really think you were going to be able to keep it quiet in a town this size? With the rumor mill starting, people are gonna, it's gonna escalate to the point where people are gonna think it was 9.5 weeks," which is the name of a movie, 9.5 Weeks, starring, what's his name? Mickey Rourke, I think.
Mickey Rourke. And Kim Basinger, maybe?
And Kim Basinger, yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm. Which I have seen, and which I personally did not like very much.
Oh, I thought it was a terrible movie, but it was very popular.
Yeah, it was very popular.
It won some awards. Well, I think Mickey Rourke did a great job. He was...
I mean, the acting was good.
Yeah. I think for a while there, he was a really well-loved actor. Yeah. And he was a good actor, but I never really thought of him as being a great actor, but a lot of people did. I don't know. Maybe it was the kind of movies he made. So
this was before he did... 9.5 Weeks was made before he did boxing for a while. And so his face changed because of what happened when he was boxing.
Yeah.
And so I think he was an actor for a while, and then he did boxing for a while, and then he went back to acting, and that's, I think, part of why he was drawn to the role in the movie The Wrestler, because he had, experienced some of that lifestyle.
But his face had been so distorted or so changed.
It had been changed, yeah.
Only roles he could get were kind of crazy ones. Like he was the bad guy in
Iron Man.
In an Iron Man movie, yeah. The crazy bad guy.
Yeah.
With the chains.
Sure. Yeah, whereas in 9.5 Weeks, he's very much like the sexy romantic lead.
Yeah, I guess. He wasn't appealing to me. I like Kim Basinger, though.
Yeah. I mean, that character wasn't appealing. I had a friend in college who made me watch the movie, and I don't know. I find it to be, it's kind of like a proto 50 Shades of Grey.
Mm-hmm. There are a handful of movies like that are just have, you hear things about them and people, and the impression you get is that there's just a whole lot of sex in them, and people, it's like hush hush and whatever, but you gotta go see this because there's a lot of sex in it, and then you watch it and it's just stupid. And it's like first of all, there's not a whole lot of sex in it, and what there is just stupid. So
also like the big supposed sex scene, as far as I'm concerned, looks like a scene of coercion. Like, to me, that does not read as a sexy sex scene. It reads as a sexual assault. Different people are going to have different opinions about that, I guess.
No, I think you're right. Anytime sex is presented as being violent in any way,
and she says
not
no.
And there's not being passionate and being violent, two very different things.
Yeah.
But too often sex is shown as being violent.
Yeah.
And it's just, I'm sorry, men directors, women do not like violent sex. Mm-hmm. Get that through your fucking thick heads, would you? So maybe men do. I don't even think men do. I don't think men like it either. So why do they depict it all the time? We're completely off topic here, by the way.
We're completely off topic. I will say, though, there is a famous scene in 9.5 Weeks where the male character feeds the female character fruit and different things from his fridge while she's blindfolded. So I do think it's an appropriate reference here, because they did kiss in the market.
Oh, there you go. You made the connection.
Yes. 9.5 Weeks does have a sort of market-related scene. But it's also it's also a point of contrast, because their kiss was very chaste, and 9.5 Weeks
innocent,
is known. And 9.5 Weeks is the opposite of that.
Well, and I have a couple of references here, too, that I don't remember why I wrote them down. One was, he mentions nice apron, or maybe, I think Lorelai says that.
Oh, yeah, she says nice apron.
And Rory had said that, Rory had said the same thing earlier.
And he says nice uniform in response. And she says she sewed her buttons on with silver thread so that she stands out from the crowd.
Yeah, that's it. And something else, I've got the Nancy Walker impression. I can't remember the context here, but I had to look Nancy Walker up because the name was familiar to me and her face is familiar to me. And I think at one time she was a character actor in like the 60s and 70s. So she showed up in a lot of, every once in a while she'd just be in a TV show, kind of like this one, where she'd just show up and she'd be in it for an episode or two, and she kind of a curmudgeonly actress. She had the kind of look about her that, was very distinctive look about her, an older woman. It seems like she was always older, even when she was younger. But anyways, I had to look it up and see who she was, and I did remember, but I can't remember what the reference was here.
So basically what happens is Lorelai and Rory talk about Dean a little bit, and Lorelai goes full on into like super supportive girlfriend mode, although there is a little bit of a hint that she's not as okay with it as she's pretending to be, because she keeps overemphasizing how fine she is. And then basically the next scene is they go to the market to pick up junk food for movie night, where they're going to watch Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and Rory pauses outside the market and basically admits that she does not feel ready for Lorelai to meet Dean, and she tells her no Nancy Walker impressions. So that's basically the reference.
Well, and I wonder if, I don't think we've seen it, but is she known for her Nancy Walker impression?
I don't think we've seen it. I'm not sure where this is coming from, but I guess she does do a Nancy Walker impression. I don't know.
Well, and the thing that's going on here is that, or with Lorelai, I think, is that she cannot figure out why she's reacting the way she is. She hasn't quite figured it out yet. She's uncomfortable with it because she really doesn't care if her daughter has a boyfriend. And she doesn't care that she's been kissed. What she can't quite figure out yet is that what she's missing here is that Rory didn't just tell her about it and describe the whole scene in its entirety, because they share everything. In fact, when she's talking to Luke earlier, she says, we tell each other everything. I got down that one of them said, this is different. I think he said that to her.
He said it, yeah.
This is different. So, but it's not different. She was going to tell her.
Yeah.
It was just it was a circumstantial thing. She couldn't tell her because she didn't yet know about it. She's been hiding Dean. Mm-hmm. So Rory has been hiding Dean, so she can't share with her mother what she wants to share with her. Lorelai doesn't know. Lorelai knows about Dean because she saw the scene in the garden in the last episode, mm-hmm. but Rory doesn't know that. Yeah. So there's a lot of secrets in this episode.
I think there's also, part of what's happening here is that Lorelai is trying to figure out, she's trying to navigate between being the mom and being the best friend. Because for most people, those are two different roles. And I think especially when there's such an age difference, when one of you is an adult and one of you is a teenager, like we've said multiple times before, a part of the show is the show about Rory coming of age. And this is a big moment in that, and that's a big transitional period. And so I think they are both grappling with what their role is supposed to be. And I think part of why it was hard for Rory to tell her, even though she wanted to, was because to a certain extent, she wants to approach Lorelai as her best friend, but she knows that Lorelai is also her mom, and she doesn't know how that's going to affect this particular situation. And for Lorelai, it's the same. Lorelai herself doesn't entirely know how she's supposed to react. She decides to try to go full friend. Her choice initially is, I'm just going to be fully supportive. I'm going to do the opposite of what my mother would do. And that's the other thing, is that this whole thing is kind of underpinned by Lorelai's past trauma with Emily, which comes up pretty hard in a moment. But I guess basically in the following scene, her initial impulse is to try and be as different from her mom as possible, because she doesn't want to alienate Rory, and because, their relationship has been one of friendship as well.
So this whole scene and the one that's coming up and the whole episode brings up for me a question that I think every good parent has grappled with ever. And that is your child your friend, or is your child your child? Mm-hmm. You see memes on the internet all the time as, I'm not your friend, I'm your mother. Mm-hmm. So, and I have gone back and forth with that, because you and I have a lot in common. We're very good friends, but at the same time, and not, of course now you're an adult, but when you were still living with me or growing up or in, high school, college, all those things, I had to set limits, and limits gradually became advice, because that's the way it should progress. And when you set limits with somebody that you also have a very good relationship with, it's hard. And it's a hard, as you will, I hope, find out someday, it's a hard thing to, what's the word I want?
Navigate.
To navigate together. With the two different roles, and actually parenting, you have a lot of different roles, and there's a lot of things that happen in a parent-child relationship. You want to be the advisor, you want to be you have to be the enforcer, because they could die if you don't enforce certain roles. Your child could die. So you literally have to make them wear a coat. You have to you have to make them come in at a certain hour so they're not outside and their lives are you have to teach them to drive carefully and safely. Yeah. And these are all things that children push back against, because their job is to grow up.
Yeah.
Is to figure these things, to get to a point where they can figure these kinds of things out on their own, so that you're not there, when they're 60 years old, still telling them, you should put your socks on. So it's a very difficult role to navigate. And she's doing that here. But their relationship is the exact kind of relationship that most parents are cautioned not to develop.
Yeah.
So it's too much one of friendship. Now, it has worked out well for them, because she happens to have a child who was probably mature at the age of 3. I mean, she's an advanced, she's gifted. And I've often said that the giftedness has to do with maturity more than anything else. Intellectually mature at an early age, emotionally and psychologically logically sometimes too, but she's always been a very mature person. So Lorelai has lucked out. But if she had been a different kind of person, this good friendship, I'm not going to set any rules kind of relationship might have proved deadly for her child. So this is fiction. It's fiction.
Although
so,
I think we also see in this episode in just a moment that in a way Rory is not fully ready for what's happening, or at the very least is not confident about it. She lacks a confidence with men that Lorelai has always had.
Yeah, that's the part where when that happens and she walks her through that and helps her with that, perfect. That is appropriate. And that is exactly the way a mother-daughter relationship should work. And we'll get to it in a minute. But that's perfect.
So before we do get to that, I did have a couple of notes about this scene. So they do end up entering into the market. Lorelai agrees to know Nancy Walker impressions. They go into the market and they kind of like spy on Dean together. And it actually pretty quickly becomes a bonding moment for them because Lorelai is really good at being the girlfriend.
Yep.
That's the path that she's chosen to take in this moment. So they kind of girl bond over him while they're walking through the store. And then they go up to the cash register. And I do just want to point out that the cashier in this scene is maybe the second black person that we've seen on the show, and I don't love that she's basically a prop in this scene.
But she has a couple of good lines and she's funny, so.
She does, but she's basically there to start the interaction that then becomes fully about Dean. Mm-hmm. And like I do get it. It's not necessarily a criticism of like the writing of this character specifically. It's more just like the fact that we are now seeing this black character makes it very clear how few black characters there are on the show otherwise. It's pretty much just Michelle in terms
just one.
Yeah. In terms of long running characters, it's just Michelle.
Yeah. So and she is doing a labor type job. She's not a professional. Although most of the characters in the show it's not a professional town for the most part. So
most of the characters in the town are going to be doing those kinds of jobs pretty much, unless we're dealing with the grandparents. Most of the people we're going to be interacting with are going to be some degree of working class. But my main issue is just like second black person we've seen on the whole show, and she's not really a character.
She's not, but I really liked her. The actress made the most of it. She really comes across as being I actually thought about for a second, I hope we see her again because she's a good character. So
I kind of don't think we will, but maybe
I don't think we will either. Too bad.
But but their interaction with Dean is pretty good. It's cute. It works, and
then she ruins it.
Yeah, well, she kind of jokingly ruins it first because as they're walking out the door, she calls Rory a supermarket slut, and then they walk out the door and they split up so that Rory can go get the movie before the movie place closes. Lorelai's gonna go get coffee, but before she can get coffee, Dean comes out and catches Lorelai because they forgot their red vines, I think, and
whatever those are.
They're basically like Twizzlers.
Okay.
But I think they're the ones that separate into littler ones, if that makes sense. But Dean comes out and Lorelai immediately invites him to join them for their movie night without asking Rory. You can tell that she's doing it to be nice and because it's part of her like, I'm totally on board with this, I'm gonna help them hang out thing. But in a way, she's doing a much less egregious version of what Emily did to Rory last week.
Oh God, she is. Yes.
Inviting someone over without actually asking Rory if that's what she wants.
Well, and Lorelai she's a flirt, she's charismatic, she's really good with men, even very young men like this teenager. She's adorable, but she she acts before she thinks, and as soon as she's finished inviting him and he walks away, I think you can kind of see on her face she's not sure she did the right thing. And then she didn't do the right thing. I kind of thought it was sweet and cute, and I can see why she did it in the moment that it was happening. As a mother, I can see why she did it for all the same reasons she's thinking it through. But as soon as she did it, I thought, oh, Rory's not going to like this.
Nope, and she doesn't. She comes over and finds out, and she is horrified, just wildly not okay. They basically get into a fight right there on the street. Honestly, they both kind of overreact a little bit. Rory keeps calling Lorelai my mother in this this tone that Lorelai really doesn't like. And then she does compare her to Emily.
Yeah.
And
I also think that Rory doesn't, because she has no experience with boys, and Lorelai does.
Mhm.
And this is actually a great way to start a relationship, I think. In fact, I think my first date with my first boyfriend, we went on a thing with my family. So and she's given her a boost here. She's given her a way to spend some time with this boy she likes in an environment, an atmosphere in her home that is comfortable to her. But she's not seeing that yet. I think she does see it later, but she's not seeing it yet. She just sees it as her mom controlling and stepping in and butting in. And she, what would you mean, when you get to the point where she's trying to pick out her clothes in a minute, she can't even get through that without, asking her mom for help.
She's just really anxious. She's really anxious
she's
about
very
interacting
anxious.
with him.
This is a great first date for them in terms of her anxiety. I mean, it's a great way to get through it, and they end up having a good time. Yeah. So it is a little weird, but that's Lorelai. That's what she does.
I think also, like, to a certain extent, Rory is maybe underestimating how smooth Lorelai is. Because Lorelai does say something like, well, I can just disappear into the background and you guys can hang out. And then then Rory says, oh, then it's going to seem like you set up a date for me.
And I do think this is Rory not understanding how the world works.
A little bit, yeah.
She is so naive.
Yeah.
And so she doesn't know what to think. She doesn't know how to react. She's just coming up with anything she can think of. I think she realizes, oh my God, my mom has forced me into a first date with this boy. That's what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about every single one of her interactions with Dean, the vast majority of them have ended with her literally running away.
Yeah.
And most of them have only lasted a few minutes. So I think to a certain extent, Lorelai has forced her hand and is forcing her to, like, hang out with Dean for a significant amount of time instead of, like, just a couple of minutes and then running away. And Rory doesn't feel quite ready for that, but it does end up going pretty well. And then, so then they have the little scene where Rory's trying to get ready and tells Lorelai that she doesn't understand how Lorelai is as good with guys as she is, then asks for her help choosing what to wear, and Lorelai picks out basically just a sweater, a regular sweater, and says, wear this. It says, I'm cool but not too cool, or whatever. Yeah,
it's not the sweater itself, but the reassurance that she gives her that it's not the clothes that matter. It's you that matters. And Lorelai knows that because she's supremely self-confident. And I think she realizes in that moment that her daughter isn't. It's like, does it really take a boy for you to realize how not confident she is? She's been, the entire 7 episodes at this point have revolved around this 16, now 17-year-old girl lacking self-confidence in every way. Yeah. So, and you never understand it because she's smart and funny and cute, but she can't see any of that.
Well, and I think also, I actually think it kind of does make sense that Lorelai doesn't fully get it, because I think when Rory is around Lorelai, she seems a little more confident because she kind of feeds off of Lorelai's energy.
She does,
in the first episode, when that creepy dude tries to hit on the both of them, Rory seems almost as confident as Lorelai, but it's partly because she's good at banter with her mom, and so she can do that with another person there. But, when her mom is not there, she doesn't have that, and then she is much less confident.
Yeah, she is. So before they get into the scene where he's there and they're watching television, how many people come to the door? I mean, maybe it's not a lot, but it seems like the whole town knows that Dean is coming to have pizza and watch movies with us tonight. So I mean, it's only Suki, but she says that everybody knows.
Yeah, I think technically Suki is the only one who goes to the door.
And the pizza guy.
But it's they're waiting for Dean. He's late, and then they look out the window and they realize that he has run into Babette.
Oh, yeah.
And we later find out that she kept him there for half an hour. So he's been there for half an hour, and Babette has just been stream of consciousness talking at him.
And he doesn't know how to get away. Lorelai does, because the minute Lorelai walks up, she sends the two of them in the house and cuts it off with Babette like that, because she knows instantly what to say.
Yeah, also, oh god, Babette in this scene is a little bit creepy. So yeah, Lorelai comes outside and tells Dean to go inside and help Rory, and then Babette is like, oh, you have to tell me about Rory's new boyfriend, and she says that she heard that they had kissed in the market, and her comment on that is, gives a whole new meaning to tasting day.
Oh my god.
So creepy. And then her next comment is like, remember to invite me to the wedding.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, my comment on that was, Babette is like every cliche aunt character spitting out all the catchphrases in like 30 seconds flat.
And then what's her boyfriend's name? And you see him or
Maury.
her husband?
Maury with an M.
M-A-U-R-Y. Okay.
Yes.
You see him for just a brief second in the window, because that's the only time you ever see him is in the house and through the window. And when it's not a scene about their cat dying, that's where you see Maury, and he just kind of waves because he's always there.
Yep. So then there are kind of two scenes that happen at once. They get in the house. Lorelai starts a tour of the house for Dean, but then has Rory take over because someone rings the doorbell. She goes over expecting it to be pizza, but it's actually Suki, who basically on the spot tries to invite herself over. But Lorelai will not allow it because she knows that Rory is already mortified that any of this is happening.
Well, here's my question about this scene, though. She tells Rory to give Dean a tour of the house. Why? Why would you give a teenage boy a tour of your house when it's basically just 3 rooms? And the only room that's back there, besides the kitchen, is the bedroom.
I mean, to be fair, Lorelai is right there, so it's not like, anything that inappropriate could happen. I think it's just an icebreaker. I think she does that as just, like, an icebreaker.
It seems bad writing to me. It's like they couldn't come up with another idea.
Yeah, to me, I was just like, I feel like the icebreaker is watching the movie.
Yes. Why don't you guys sit down and start eating? There's a whole table full of food over there. Go get a seat. And also then they're sitting on the floor, too, instead of the couch, which never makes any sense to me.
Yeah,
but so
weird.
why don't you just go sit on the couch and have some food, start the movie, pause it, I'll be over in a second. Or don't pause it. I've seen it a million times. So, it makes no sense.
But it does give us the scene where Dean is looking around Rory's room. Rory will not enter the room with him, but he goes over to her, I guess it's a CD player, and picks up a Nick Drake CD.
Yep.
It's Pink Moon, and he says, how much does it suck that they used Pink Moon in a Volkswagen commercial? And
which is a reference to it right over my head.
Yeah. I
idea what that's about.
I only knew it because I had looked up Nick Drake, and so yeah, that's one of his albums. And my question is, was Rory actually a fan of Nick Drake, or did she run out and buy this album because Lane told her that Dean likes Nick Drake? I don't know.
That's a good question, actually.
Yeah, I don't know.
Good question.
I feel like we don't actually get that much insight into Rory's music tastes, apart from that she likes Macy Gray.
Yeah.
But that's what they're talking about. And then the pizza shows up, and Lorelai successfully gets Suki to leave, but not before Rory and Dean see her there.
And Dean is totally freaked out at this point.
Yes. And Rory pulls Lorelai aside and says, why didn't you just set up a camera and broadcast it all over the internet? So then they start watching the movie. There's kind of an uncomfortable discussion about how much Rory eats. They're like eating the pizza, which I feel like they're not even like going that crazy on the pizza. We see it and like half of the pizza is left and there's 3 of them there. That's kind of a normal amount of pizza for 3 people to eat.
Yeah, it's the other stuff. There's a table full of junk food.
Yeah, the table full of junk food is insane.
Yeah.
But the pizza is not that much, but I think Dean says something like, wow, you can really eat, huh? And at first Rory's like, yeah, I can. And then she immediately gets self-conscious about it and says something like, oh, that's not a good thing, is it? And then Dean says, most girls don't eat. It's good you eat.
Actually, that's actually a good point. And there was a time in history when girls were taught when you go out on a date and there's food involved, you don't eat much.
You don't eat, yeah.
So, yeah, you we're not supposed to eat much. And so he has sisters, I think is when he says this. And they've probably marked on it with him.
He says the sisters thing in a second, but he does have the sisters.
That's probably what happened.
I feel like at this time it was really common to have the cool guy character, the like good guy character, remark that he likes that the girl actually eats, but the line is always delivered to a girl who is white, pretty, and skinny. Like, this is never a line that is actually delivered to a woman who looks like she eats. You know, it's never delivered to a fat woman. It's never delivered to a woman who in any way is outside of the bounds of a very strict mainstream idea of beauty. And I feel like it's kind of like a false feminist flag. Like, this guy is supposed to be a feminist because he likes a girl that eats, but he only likes a girl that eats and looks the way that Rory does. You know? And it's also just kind of like, you know what? In reality, to look as skinny as Rory does, you can't eat this way.
Or you have to work out an awful lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, it's kind of a lie. Like, it's kind of like, it's kind of almost making, I think the idea was supposed to be that this means that this is a guy who, like, doesn't care as much about girls adhering to a standard, except it does. It's just that standard is you have to look this way and you have to eat. You can't rain on anyone's parade by making it clear to the men that looking this way requires not eating.
Well, I also think he's trying to make her feel better, because he realizes as soon as after he said this about she likes to eat or she eats a lot or whatever, she responds with, that's not a good thing. He realizes he's made her even more nervous, and he knows she's nervous. So so he does come back with a good comment, and I think that just shows how sensitive he is. I mean, I agree with everything you just said, but I do think he's I
think in the context, I understand why he's saying it, and he is trying to make her feel less self-conscious. I do think that's true. I just think it is representative of a trend at this time that kind of sucked. And so this is more a note for the writers than for him as a character, especially in a show where they make so much about, I mean, like, Gilmore Girls is almost the standard bearer for this, right? They make such a big deal out of how much these two women supposedly eat.
And yet you never see them eat.
And yet you never actually see them eat, and they look the way that they do. And I think we've talked about this a little bit in a previous episode, but, like, Lauren Graham has talked about what she actually eats, and it is not this. She is not eating tables of junk food. She's eating, like, spinach and egg whites, you know? Like, that kind of a meal. So, I don't know. Also, I will say, the way that it's phrased from him is a little bit less grating than it normally is, because it's normally phrased like, I like a girl who eats, which is just, like, freaking not true. The way that he phrases it is, most girls don't eat, it's good you eat. If you just take it's good you eat, that is true. That is good. And, like, people should eat. We need to eat to survive.
Well, and, you know, too, there's the thing that this scene made me think of was when I was a teenager, on dates with my first boyfriend, I didn't eat very much on these dates at all. We would, you know, go get pizza or whatever, and I would eat a couple of bites. And it wasn't because I was not trying to be seen eating. I was just a nervous wreck. Yeah. I'm such an introvert, still am. And, you know, just could not bring myself to eat. So, but it became a joke between us sometimes. You know, we'd order a pizza and he'd say, so I'm going to eat 6 pieces and you're going to have a half of one, right? I mean, it was a joke between us, but, you know, and it wasn't because of the traditional reasoning. It was just that I was nervous. And I never got past that. It wasn't until, you know, it wasn't for 3 or 4 years till I dated several different people before I got better about eating on a date, because I was just so nervous. Part of me wondered if that is, at least in the writer's mind in this scene, even though it's not happening with the character, but maybe it is, because we don't see her eat any of that junk food that's on the table. She doesn't pick any of it up, because we don't see Lorelai eat it either. But none of it's open. It's all unopened. It's just sitting there on the table unopened. But anyway, so
then we start talking about movies a little bit. Lorelai kind of outs Rory for having had a crush on Prince Charming from Sleeping Beauty, which Dean immediately understands is because he could dance. I don't think I've ever seen Sleeping Beauty all the way through.
I don't remember it well enough to know that he could dance, but okay.
And there is I think there is an early scene where the two of them dance. Like one of the famous scenes is of Sleeping Beauty in the Briar Rose outfit dancing. But I'm not an expert. I don't think I've seen the movie all the way through. But this is where he says that he has sisters, and so that's how he knows that it's because he can dance. Dean has also never seen The Way We Were, and neither have I.
It's one of those sappy movies. It is Robert Redford and Barbara Streisand.
I think I've seen the Sex and the City episode that references it a ton, so I'm like somewhat familiar with what happens.
And I'm trying to remember if it's it might be one of those movies that's constructed with it's a throwback the whole time. She's remembering that happened. That's why it's the way we were. It's a memory.
Yeah.
It seems like that's how it's constructed. So you see them, they see each other the beginning of the movie, years after the relationship is ended, and then she remembers the whole relationship. I think that's right. I could be wrong, or it could just be that they see each other at the end anyway. So, but they do kind of, it's the 60s, or when they met each other, the 60s, they do kind of get into some protests, and the communist thing isn't really, it's more of a protest thing than a communist thing. It seems like, it's been a long time since I saw it, and I only saw it once, but he leaves her because she's too into this. Or they break up, and it's his choice, because she's a very fervent, zealous kind of person, and he just really wants a normal lifestyle. He's his rebellious years were his young years, and he's ready to move on. So they separate, they go their own ways. He has a family. I don't remember what she has. Anyway, it does not have a happy ending for them, which is kind of what they're referencing there. I think they should have gotten back together.
So after that, Lorelai leaves them by themselves for a little bit. She kind of excuses herself to go make popcorn, and then peeks back in and sees that they're having a nice time together. So she sort of quietly decides to stay in the kitchen, which is, kind of what she suggested she could do earlier. And
here's a visual question, though. That popcorn bowl that she's carrying, she tips it several times as she's carrying it. And she walks into the kitchen and she's bouncing, and the bowl is bouncing and it's tipping. And I'm like, I'm sorry, that popcorn is not moving.
It's not real. It's not real popcorn.
It's not real popcorn. And then she goes back and does the same thing, and she's walking back into the kitchen. It's still bouncing and flipping, and it's not moving. It's not spilling. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out. It's like the coffee cup thing. Yeah, the empty coffee cup thing. It's like, do these prop masters not know that we see these things? Anyway, I have a friend who's a prop master. I should ask her.
So she sits in there, and she's got a magazine that she's reading through. But then Rory and Dean are alone, and she starts to shift because she's uncomfortable, and Dean picks up a pillow and puts it down for her.
Because he's sitting in front of the couch. He's leaning against the couch. They're on the floor. Yeah. She's got nothing to lean against. He gives her a bed pillow, not even a couch pillow, but a bed pillow, and puts it behind her, and I'm like, what's she supposed to do, lay down?
Yeah, and my response was definitely, you guys could both just be sitting on the couch.
Or scoot over. So they scoot over so you're both sitting up against, they're afraid to do anything with it. They're very awkward with each other.
And in fact, Rory gets so awkward in this moment that she gets up and walks into the kitchen.
And this is the scene of disbelief, because they have a loud conversation, and they are just a room away. And I'm sorry, he doesn't hear any of it, really?
He should have absolutely heard every single word they said. That's for sure. Rory basically comes into the kitchen and tells Lorelai that she wants her to go back into mom mode from friend mode, and to come in and not leave them alone anymore, because she is not ready to deal with that.
Which kind of validates the whole situation, because she has to realize at this point that Lorelai knew what she was doing, even though Lorelai didn't realize that she knew what she was doing, but she did.
And she does come back in, and for some reason they decide that Rory doesn't want them to enter the room together, so she goes to the bathroom, and they decide to tell Dean that Rory is washing her face because of all the candy, which I guess is because it would have been too gross to say that she was just in the bathroom, because that implies that she's peeing, and God forbid Dean be aware that she has to pee sometimes, so instead she's washing her face.
Doesn't she eat? So
that does mean that Lorelai and Dean get a moment alone, and Lorelai decides it's time to give him the speech, and she starts her speech with, she's not going on your motorcycle. Yeah,
and she says a few things in there I think that are just uncalled for. It's like she feels like she has to be the heavy and give him a warning at this point. And my question was, first of all, do you not know your daughter? First of all, she's got a background. Lorelai has a history. She was a single mom at 16, so she is worried about all kinds of things. But she's got to know at this point that her daughter is not her. And yet she gives Dean this very uncomfortable speech. I mean, I felt uncomfortable watching it. I think she overstepped in a couple of places, or maybe it was badly written. I'm not sure. The part about the town was sweet and true. That she says that the whole town loves Lorelai and will protect her.
Yeah.
And it's true, because I've said several times that the whole town has helped to raise her.
Yeah.
She's their baby. But the rest of it was pretty mean, I thought.
It was definitely a bit much. Again, I feel like today we would look at this differently than we did at the time. I feel like at this time, it was still pretty common and accepted to... Actually, there's a reference earlier when Rory says the no Nancy Walker impressions thing. She also says, no father with a shotgun stare. And I think that's kind of what Lorelai is doing here. It's the father with the shotgun speech. And I feel like at the time, we still kind of accepted that. And I mean, even now, there are a lot of people who think that that's totally okay. That it's totally okay to be this overprotective of your daughter's sexuality in a way that we don't tend to do to young men.
And I think it's because she suspects Dean. She looks at him. Somehow she has a form of radar that she can tell that this guy is experienced. He may not even be a virgin. He has had a girlfriend for a whole year. She gets that from looking at him and the way he interacts with Rory. She gets that he is way more experienced than Rory is. So she understands that he needs to understand that she will protect her daughter. But she could have said it more nicely, I think.
I think she also very much sees him as a new Christopher. I don't think she's totally right. I think... All right, there's a thing that I'm not going to say because I don't want to do spoilers, but I don't think that Dean is very similar to Christopher. I think Lorelai sees him as similar to Christopher, and Rory is meeting him at a time in her life that is kind of the same time as when Lorelai got pregnant.
Yeah.
And I think the line, she's not going on your motorcycle, is a Christopher reference. Christopher has a motorcycle.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. It would be any boy at this point. If it wasn't Dean, it was it'd be somebody else. Any boy at this point is going to make her think about Christopher and her own mistakes.
Yeah. And I think she's wrong. I think Dean is not like Christopher at all.
No. And Rory is not her. Rory is not Lorelai.
Rory is not her. Yeah, for sure. But that's what he set off in her. So I feel like this is more of her own trauma response than it is in any way. I mean, it's not a reasonable way to treat him. I think this was probably at the time considered totally fine because you're allowed to be this overprotective of your daughter's sexuality and you're allowed to essentially threaten young men to...
And traditionally, it usually comes from the father.
Traditionally,
but there's no father here.
But there is no father here,
Yeah.
And as we saw, the character in this episode who is closest to Rory's father is Luke, and he is kind of on the other side of this. He thinks that it's totally fine. You know, to be fair, he's not here in this moment, but he was the one who was trying to talk her down earlier. So there's no father character to give this speech, so Lorelai is kind of taking it on herself. And you could maybe argue that maybe that's part of why she's so harsh, because she feels like she has to be, because there's no father to do it for her.
I think that's one possibility. I think also she is overreacting in several places in this whole episode simply because her daughter did not tell her about the kiss and did not describe it to her. So there's two things going on there. One is she's realizing that there will be lots of stories like that going forward that her daughter's not going to tell her. So there's going to be a separation, and she has to trust her daughter. So that's going on here. But also, knowing the details of the kiss would help her to feel, I think, a little bit more comfortable with the boy, which would be more, she's overreacting because she doesn't know what happened. She needs to know what happens. When after he leaves, there's a nice little kiss on the porch, and they say their goodnight, and he leaves, and then Rory comes into her mom's bedroom, and Lorelai's laying on her bed, and she does not look happy. She looks troubled. They have a little bit of a conversation, and you can probably give a little bit about that, but as Rory is leaving, Lorelai gets it across to her, you haven't told me about the kiss yet.
Yes.
And Rory doesn't understand at first what she means, but she finally gets it. She doesn't just want to know that it happened. She wants to know how it happened, what happened in that scene. That story that she told to Lane over and over again, she has not even told, even a tiny percent of it to her mom. She needs to tell her that because her mom needs to feel a little bit more comfortable with this boy. And if she told her that before, she might not have given Dean such a harsh speech, I think.
Yeah. And I do want to say that I think Dean's reaction to the speech is pretty good. He just tells her he's not going anywhere and that he needs her not to hate him. And she says she doesn't hate him, and he correctly identifies that she doesn't like him either. And her response is, I want to like you, and I usually get what I want. Which I think that line...
It's harsh.
To me, it's a little harsh, but I do think it's a little bit better than some of the rest of the speech, because it is at least honest about where she's at emotionally. Like, I feel like in a small way that line is...
Why doesn't she like him, though?
But I think emotionally it's just hard for her to. I think that line is a concession to the fact that she doesn't have a real reason not to like him, and maybe it's literally just that she just doesn't have enough information yet.
She doesn't know about the kiss.
Yeah.
She doesn't know how the kiss happened. Maybe once she gets that information, she'll be a little bit happier. So she gets that information. We don't hear it. But she sits down and starts to tell her, and that's the end of the episode, right?
Yeah, and it's very cute. Yeah, Rory comes into her room, and like you said, Lorelai looks a little upset, and finally it clicks for Rory that she needs to tell her the story, and you can see it on Lorelai's face that her whole attitude changes. She's excited to hear it. This is what she has wanted the whole episode.
And for a lot of reasons. One is she doesn't want to lose his closeness with her daughter, and another, she wants to be able to trust Dean. When she gets the story, she's going to understand. We don't see her getting it, but we know that she's going to see how sweet this was. On the other hand, if this would have happened today, you might actually say, well, he kissed her without her permission. And that's actually a whole conversation for another day, because people kissing a lot of times is without permission because somebody has to take the initiative. So that's been a whole cultural conversation that's going on right now that we haven't worked through. But when you have two people who are kissing, somebody has to take the initiative. Although he does blindside her with the kiss. She doesn't see it coming. So in that sense, a lot of times when the kiss they have on the porch at the end of their first little date is mutual. They're both moving in towards each other, so that's mutual. He doesn't have to ask permission, but he did not ask permission the first time, which if I were a young feminist, I might have an issue with that, but I'm an older feminist, so I don't.
I do think that it is a complicated issue. I would say the mitigating factor here is that it's not like they had no prior relationship when he kissed her.
Right.
They have had multiple moments leading up to this that were clearly flirtatious and romantic. And I think, to me, the key scene that makes that kiss okay is that the episode before, he gave her that pendant. Was it a pendant? He gave her that bracelet that he made. And
it's a bracelet,
hands.
Yeah.
And they held hands. And that was like a very clearly romantic moment. You know, they were alone in the garden holding hands. I feel like that is the moment that set the tone that makes it okay that he kissed her. For me personally, everybody's going to have their own opinion on it, and some people are just not going to want to be kissed unless you ask, and that's okay too. Communication is good. And
but we do see in the scene where when he kisses her, you know, surprisingly and whatever, that he has more experience than she has. So in that sense, you know, of course, we're left not knowing how Lorelai actually reacted to the story because they cut the episode off, and we have to cut off our show pretty soon.
Yeah.
But he when she is told that story, she's going to realize even more so that he has more experience than Rory has. But, you know, that's often the case. I mean, it's often the case that when you have young people like this, at this point in their lives, one may have more experience than the other. That one is usually the one who's going to initiate the kiss. So this was a lot going on here. I love the way they explore these issues. So without even probably thinking about it, you know, they probably didn't even occur to the writers, he should have asked her permission, because it was 2000.
Yeah. And I will say also, you know, their first kiss, it was very chaste, it was very quick, and so he did kiss her without asking for permission, but he didn't keep kissing her. He kissed her quickly,
he didn't
and then
force
allowed her to react.
Yeah, he pulled back and allowed her to, and then she said thank you and ran away.
Yes.
And on that note, we need to say thank you and run away.
Yes, indeed we do.
We've gone long again.
Yes. That was the episode. I'm Tessa Dare. You can find me at my website, tessadare.com. That's TESSADAIR.com, where you can sign up for my email list. Or you can follow me on Instagram at author.tess.adair, or on Twitter at authortessadare, all one word.
And I am Beth Von Baron. You can find me on Instagram at STL_writer_Beth, where I also have a link tree to my other sites. And this has been Where You Lead, our brilliant and fun new podcast about the Gilmore Girls from the perspective of a mother and daughter. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll tune in for our next episode in 2 weeks. See you then.